Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Hey, what you listening to?
Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio play.
Oh, do you know anything about him?
Not really.
Well, he was born on May 6, 1915, in Wisconsin. His mother, Beatrice, a pianist, died when he was 9, and his father, an inventor, committed suicide in 1927, when he was 12 years old. Virginia Nicholson was his first love, and he married her at 19. That same year, he makes his Broadway debut as Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet. 2 years later, he directs an all-black production of Macbeth by William Shakespeare. It's set in Haiti and is a huge success. Next, he directs The Cradle Will Rock with the musical stylings of Mark Blitzstein. Welles and his friend, John Houseman, quit the Federal Theater Project and created the Mercury Theater on the Air, also known as the First Person Singular.
What is the Mercury Theater on the Air?
The Mercury Theater on the Air was a radio drama series with actors performing scripts for the entertainment of listeners. The cast included talent such as Agnes Moorehead, or Endora from TV's Bewitched, and composer Bernard Herrmann, Academy Award winner. Their first on-air production was Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. A year later, the Mercury Theater broadcasted the world-famous War of the Worlds.
Why was it so famous?
The War of the Worlds was a science fiction story by H.G. Wells, no relation to Orson. The novel was about an invasion from Mars. Orson directed it like no other broadcast at the time.
Well, why was it so different?
Well, Orson used many new techniques, such as sound effects and having his cast imitate professors or politicians.
Was he trying to make people believe there was an invasion?
That is a very controversial question. Around 12 million people were listening, even though it was not a very popular station. In fact, the Chase and Sanborn Hour had 10 times the audience as the Mercury Theater, but they began to play an unpopular singer, so people were channel surfing. They came across the Mercury Theater. Even though at the beginning of the broadcast, the introducers said it was simply a radio play, and it was Halloween night, by the time people tuned in, it was too late and they hadn't heard that. Wells added something to make the story a little freakier. He would start the story like a regular radio station, playing music, but then interrupt with updates on the alien landings. And interruptions were fairly common because of World War II and Hitler. They would happen quite a lot back then. It has been reported that 1 out of every 12 people listening believed that aliens landed in New Jersey. People ran out of their homes and described the panic like an end-of-the-world feeling, comparable to 9/11. The English government told their listeners that if they wanted their children to be safe, send them to school with a packed bag and gas masks. The broadcast was convincing, a script containing a civilian militia reporting to a field in New Jersey where a meteorite had supposedly landed. It was reported that a pod of sorts was in the field. It grew legs and began killing off the militia.
It's nothing but a shadow. Now the troops are on the edge of the Wilmot Farm. 7,000 armed men closing in on an old metal tube. A tub, rather. Well, wait, that wasn't a shadow. It's something moving. Solid metal, kind of a shield-like affair rising up out of the cylinder. It's going higher and higher. But it's standing on legs, actually rearing up on a sort of metal framework. Now it's reaching above the trees and the searchlights are on it. Hold on.
Okay, well, why are you telling me all this?
Well, George Orson Welles and the War of the Worlds had a huge impact on the radio industry and the world.
It was a remarkable broadcast. It showed people how gullible the public can be and how they can be scared by radio. And later we saw that we can see this on television where people are panicked over things that aren't true. And a lot of cable channels put out stories that are not true or just intended to scare the public and get people to go to war, for example, over something that's false. And, we've seen this happen in our lifetimes in the last few years. So it was an important event, social political event, as well as in the history of broadcasting.
He wanted people to know that they can't believe everything they hear.
Wells said later that he wanted to alert people to the dangers of radio because people like Hitler and other demagogues in America, there was a fascist priest named Father Coughlin who was attacking Jews on the radio, and Wells thought that this was a dangerous medium if people didn't listen carefully for themselves and evaluate what they're hearing, and so he wanted to show people how easily people could be scared and panic. And he said, I couldn't believe the American public would believe about monsters coming from Mars to attack us, and it's based on a famous novel.
Did anything happen to Orson Welles after all of this?
A couple people tried to sue him.
He was threatened with lawsuits and possibly, legal ramifications for doing this. Afterwards, there was no precedent for this kind of a show, so they didn't know what would happen to them. There was a lot of criticism of them afterwards for supposedly being irresponsible. But Wells, at the beginning of the broadcast, said this is the Mercury Theater's way of dressing up for Halloween in a sheet and saying boo.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a prank, actually, and they may have seen it more as a prank than as a serious thing.
There were a couple recreations of the War of the Worlds, too.
Oh, I heard about those. One of them was in Quito, Ecuador, 11 years later, right? The guy's name is Leonardo Paez. He used Orson Welles' script, but he inserted local places instead of American cities.
Yeah, the guy even convinced the local newspaper to run articles about unusual objects being seen in the sky 2 days prior to the broadcast.
Leonardo had a special effects guy to create static and screaming.
Right, but there are no actual recordings of the broadcast.
Well, why not?
Because people poured out onto the streets. Some ran to the church, some ran away. The military came in big trucks with soldiers and cops to fight the Martians. When they found out it was a hoax, people of Quito formed an angry mob and burned the building.
More than 20 people died in this incident, where a mob stormed the radio station and set fire to it.
Leonardo fled Ecuador and never came back.
It happened again in 1968 when WKBW broadcasted it. Many people believed that one as well.
He got his contract for Hollywood largely because he was so famous because of War of the Worlds. He was only 23, which is amazing when you think about what he had done by the age of 23. He was an important play director on Broadway and for the Federal Theater, and he had this radio broadcast that started that July of 1938. Well, they passed rules that you can't do that kind of program. You have to, they did clear, as you say, they clearly labeled it entertainment, but part of the problem was by the time they made the second announcement that it's just, fiction, people were already panicking and running around. And so you're not allowed to do a fake broadcast. He also did a lot of political broadcasts later on. He was very political throughout his whole career, and he did some shows in the 40s that were radio political commentaries. And one of the most interesting ones, he got in trouble for this. There was a black soldier named Isaac Woodard who was in World War II, and he came back home to the South, and he got into an argument with a bus driver who was a racist who was ordering him around, and he didn't want to do what the bus driver wanted him to do. So a policeman came and beat up Woodard and blinded him. Horrible incident. And Wells was so angered and upset that he did a series of very eloquent and angry radio broadcasts protesting this and trying to get the policeman put on trial. And they finally put him on trial. He was acquitted by an all-white jury, unfortunately.